If they lose this game, where do you go from here? College football has never been better. Interest has never been higher. I believe that we are at the dawn of the golden age of college football. It was an epic day of college football. It was one of those days where you fall in love with the sport all over again. What's up, everybody? Welcome into the program. We got picks. This is the Joel Klatt Show. I'm Joel Klatt, and we are presented by Hampton by Hilton. Big show today. Obviously, we've got picks. Didn't go great last week. We were 1-3 after that hot start, so we are 6-4 on the season against the spread. I got some good games that we're going to break down here today. Before we do that, though, just remember, wherever you're getting your podcasts, rate and review us, please. That would help out the show, and I just ask you would do that wherever you're listening to your podcasts. If you haven't subscribed on YouTube, please go subscribe on YouTube. Leave a comment below, like the video, and all of the things, because we've always got content coming out almost weekly that's exclusive to YouTube. So even if you're just listening, wherever you get your podcasts, go over to YouTube because we've got really cool content there as well. Thursday, later tonight, I will be live in Madison doing our first ever live Joel Klatt show. I'm really pumped about this. At the Majestic Theater, we're going to have all sorts of guests. So, special Friday drop of the Joel Klatt show on YouTube. That's tomorrow. That will be live, or not live. The live show will be up for you guys to watch. I'm going to have Mark Ingram there, Derek Watt there, Melvin Gordon there. Ginny, of course, the All-American girl, is going to be there. She is going to be helping us out. We're going to have a ton of fun. The band's going to be there. It's been sold out ever since we announced it. So all of that's taking place this week in Madison. Let's get into the picks, shall we? Let's start with the game I'll be at in Madison as Bama rolls into town as a 16-point favorite, number 4 in the country. And Bama comes up to Wisconsin. This is a game that a lot of people have been looking forward to for a long time. When you get these non-conference games, like for instance, last week's Texas-Michigan game, I think people would be surprised that, like, yes, it turned into this monster game with both programs. You know, you got a defending national champion, a team right off a playoff berth. But that game was actually made when, like, Charlie Strong, before Harbaugh, and Charlie Strong was the coach. You know, so you could never understand what the programs were going to be, and it just so happens that this is a very similar case with Alabama and Wisconsin. We didn't know that Nick Saban was just going to retire, and so this game has been, I would say, highly anticipated, in particular in Wisconsin, for quite some time. Kalen DeBoer heads to Camp Randall to take on the Badgers. This is Big Noon Saturday, by the way, so it'll be noon on Fox. Gus, Ginny, and I will be there. Big Noon kickoff will be there. It's going to be an epic scene. Alabama only had that 14-13 lead last week over South Florida at the start of the fourth quarter. Now, to be fair to Alabama, they were trying to play without their 2 starting offensive tackles. They put Pritchett back into the game in the fourth quarter. They felt like he probably could have gone if they really needed him. And then when they did need him, he goes in the game. What'd they do? Roll off, 28 straight points and kind of pulled away in the fourth quarter. So what looked like a really poor performance ends up on the scoreboard looking like a dominant performance because of the way they finished that game out. Now, Bama has run the ball well all season long, 264 yards per game, and Jam Miller and Justice Haynes are really the guys that are getting that done in the backfield. But remember, they've always got Jalen Milroe's legs, so the run game's always going to be there, and Kalen DeBoer's not going to shy away from that. This is not just a pass-happy offense that wants to throw the ball down the field like he did last year at Washington. He's going to want to run the football. Now, when he does throw it, they've got Ryan Williams. Ryan Williams has been a sensational addition to this roster. They had struggled over the course of the last couple of years because they didn't have, I would say, like, adequate wide receiver play. In particular, as it related to what they had in their past with those great run, really, of wide receivers. Now they've got Ryan Williams. He's only 17 years old, by the way. This is going to blow your mind. He reclassified. He was supposed to be in this next recruiting class in 2025. He reclassifies. He's 17. He decommitted after Saban retired, but Kalen DeBoer got him to stay, and he recommitted and showed up there at Alabama, and he's been tremendous. Only Jeremiah Smith, who I think could be one of the better players we've seen in a long time. He's the wide receiver at Ohio State. Only Jeremiah Smith has more yards as a freshman in the country. This offensive line I just touched on, Proctor, who transferred to Iowa and then came back to Alabama. They got Pritchett at right tackle. I think both of those guys are going to be playing in this game. It just remains to be seen about Proctor. I believe Pritchett's going to be able to go, in particular after he was able to go back into the game in the fourth quarter against South Florida. If they're both in the game, then the offensive line becomes one of the better offensive lines in the country. Okay. Now, if they're not in the game, then it wasn't great last week, and the penalties showed up. They had some holding calls, and they were stagnant for much of the day offensively. On the other side, Wisconsin's going to go with Tyler Van Dyke, and he's continuing to try to recreate this magic that he had found early in his career at Miami. I don't know if that's going to show up or not. I do think that Wisconsin is a better running team than they were a year ago, so maybe they don't have to be as pass happy as they were last year. Remember, Phil Longo, he's their offensive coordinator. He came from North Carolina. He's got that air raid background. So last year when they threw the ball over 50% of the time, it wasn't a surprise. It was just a major change. They hadn't thrown the ball over 50% of the time for a whole season since the 40s. At Wisconsin. So it was a big shift. Now, they've gone back to running the ball effectively and for the majority of the time in their 2 opening games this year. And they do feel like they're going to be able to run the ball well. They've got some good players on the defensive side. I think that their defense is underrated at this point. Obviously, Wisconsin's always had solid defense, but this defense in particular is a bit underrated. They are going to be without their senior captain in the middle of the defense, Jake Chaney. He got ejected for targeting in the second half of last week's game, and so he'll be out for the first half of this week's game. Now, the reason I'm not as concerned about that is because they brought in a transfer from USC named Tackett Curtis, and they're really high on Tackett Curtis. I understand that USC defensively was not great last year, but Tackett Curtis is a really good player. He's a talented player. And when he came into the game last week after Chaney was ejected, they felt like he played really well, and they don't feel like this is going to be something that's going to impact them. Actually, they just feel like it's going to give them a boost because of the depth and freshness that Chaney will enter the game with in the third quarter. That'll be a big boost for them. Tackett was second on the team, or excuse me, Jake Chaney was second on the team in tackles last year. They've got some good players in the secondary. Ricardo Hallman, he was an All-American last year. He had 7 picks. Hunter Wohler is their safety. He had 120 tackles. He was a first-team All-Big Ten player. So I say all of this about their defense because I do think Wisconsin can play really well on that defensive side. The biggest question for me is that Wisconsin's going to have to control the line of scrimmage because they can't just allow that defense to be on the field against Ryan Williams and Jalen Milroe and company for the entirety of the game. They've got to win the time of possession. So it becomes an offensive line battle for Wisconsin. Can they hold up against that defense? I don't know. We'll see. You know, I thought Alabama's defense was okay against South Florida. I didn't feel like they were great. And we'll see how they play on Saturday. Again, that's a 16-point spread. Won't make a pick in that one, but that's a little bit of a breakdown for our big noon Saturday matchup in Madison. Let's go out to K-State. Arizona at Kansas State. This one's a big Friday night game, okay? And Fox is debuting our first game of Fox College Football Friday. Very excited about this here at Fox. We've got good marquee matchups that are going to go on Friday night on the network and lead you right into Big Noon Kickoff and Big Noon Saturday. So you can sit on Fox on Friday night. You don't have to change the channel. Boom, we're right there on Saturday morning for you getting your college football fix. This is a top 20 matchup. Arizona ranked 20, Kansas State ranked 14. Kansas State at home is favored by 7.5. That might be a lot. Now, this is not an official league game, even though they're both in the Big 12. Just a little bit of a background on this. This was a non-league game that had been scheduled for years, and then once realignment happened, they kept it on the schedule, but this one won't count as a league game. That could mean a whole lot when we get to these tiebreakers at the end of the year in a league in which we think that most of these teams are going to be bunched up in terms of getting those top 2 seeds for the conference championship game. So that'll be something to watch as the season goes on. But again, this game, not a league game between Arizona and Kansas State. I love this quarterback matchup. Avery Johnson for Kansas State, a guy that they're very high on, so high on that they allowed Will Howard to walk and go to Ohio State. On the other side for Arizona, Noah Fafita. These two guys are really good players. I think Avery Johnson as a runner and Noah Fafita as a thrower are two of the better players in this conference. And largely, the game will depend, the outcome of the game will rest on which of these two players plays better. Now, two different styles, but we'll get to that. The best player in the game individually is probably the wide receiver for the Wildcats. That's Teteroa McMillan. He's one of the best players in the country, by the way, as a wide receiver. He's going to be, I think he's the leading candidate right now for the Blitnikoff Award. You look at it, he had 300 yards and 4 touchdowns in the first game. Now, he was quiet in game number 2, only had a couple of catches, but look for him to be targeted early and often. In a game of this magnitude, a top 20 matchup, you're on the road. What do you need to do? You've got to get the ball to your main contributors and the best players on your team. McMillan is that guy for Arizona. Fafita and McMillan have played together basically since they were in diapers. So I don't think the environment is going to affect them all that much. I really love that combination. Both of these teams did struggle last week, and it just makes me think to myself, were they each looking ahead to this game? That's entirely plausible because of the magnitude of the game. The top 20 matchup. They each struggled. Arizona kind of trailing FCS Northern Arizona at half before kind of coming back and pulling away. Kansas State, they had to come back on Tulane. Now, Tulane, to be fair, that's not an FCS school. That's one of the schools that we would say would be possibly in the running for a playoff spot as one of the best group of 5 teams in the country. So I don't want to throw up too much caution because, at least in that case, Kansas State and Tulane is a pretty good team. One concern for Kansas State, though, they did not defend the pass last week all that well. They gave up 342 yards through the air to Tulane, and now they've got to face Noah Fafita and Teteroa McMillan. So yikes. That's not a good recipe. The defense did step up in the second half. It's a unit that you would expect to play well because they're Kansas State. They should be tough-oriented. They should be sound schematically. And those yards were a bit alarming. That defense has shown they can go get after the passer, though. They're going to need to in this game. They've had 9 sacks through 2 games. That's going to need to continue for Kansas State. Arizona's defense, on the flip side, they've also had, let's just face it, a bit of a struggle to open the year. They give up 39 points in week 1 versus New Mexico. That's entirely too many. And that's the main reason why I'm leaning towards Kansas State in this game. The Kansas State rushing attack is real. They've got Avery Johnson, the quarterback. He can run it. DJ Giddens, he's solid out of the backfield. And remember, they got Colorado transfer Dylan Edwards, who catches it incredibly well from the backfield. So as a team, they're averaging around 250 yards per game on nearly 8 yards per carry. That, plus them being at home, plus the Arizona defense giving up 39, leads me to believe that Kansas State will score. They will score often, and they will win the game. The problem is that Arizona is going to be right there because I don't think Kansas State is going to stop that passing attack. I think 7.5 is too much. I like Kansas State at home winning the game in a close one. I like a high-scoring 35-32 game with Kansas State winning this one at home, but Arizona covering the 7.5. Let's go out to Missouri. Now, we haven't talked a lot about Missouri yet, even though they've been dominant. They've done exactly what they needed to do. They beat, 51-0 over Murray State, 38-0 over Buffalo. And now Bill O'Brien and Boston College come to town. They opened the season in an emphatic way, like Nuke LaLoosh. They announced their presence with authority over Florida State. That was a huge win for them, and they come in ranked in this matchup for the first time since 2018. They're ranked 24th in the country. Missouri is ranked 6th in the country. Missouri is favored by 16.5. That might be a lot. BC ran it all over Florida State. Now, you could say, so did Georgia Tech, and then Georgia Tech hasn't played well subsequently, so maybe Florida State is just totally overrated. Okay, that's fine. It's still a $12 million roster, and they ran the ball for 263 yards and held the ball for 39 minutes in that game against Florida State. That one was on the road. Remember now, Boston College has already gone into an environment that we would say is difficult and beat a team that we would say is better than them. They've already done that. So that's in their toolbox. Now they're going to Missouri. Is Missouri better than Florida State? Almost assuredly they are. In particular, after what we've seen from Florida State over the course of the opening of the season. But Boston College, if you're going to build a team that can go in and face an environment like that, it's them. They've run it on 74% of their snaps. It's the most run-heavy team thus far in the Power Four. They have 4 players with at least 15 carries, so they're not just running on or riding on one guy. It's not just a bell cow. And their quarterback, Thomas Castellanos, he's a really good player. I think that BC is going to be in this game. Missouri, they've got the firepower on offense. We know that I like Brady Cook. We know that I love Luther Burden. They've got Theo Weiss, who was once an Oklahoma player. The Missouri defense, they've pitched 2 shutouts, but I don't really know. And now they're going to be tested against this Boston College team. I think 16.5 might be too much. Okay, so for the second straight game, I like Missouri at home to win, even somewhat comfortably by 11. I just think 16.5 is too much. I could see a game in which Mizzou wins this 28-17. Boston College just doesn't have the firepower. Mizzou is able to get loose a couple of times, but they only have the ball for about 24 or 25 minutes. And then you look up and it's like 28-17. It didn't feel like that close of a game, but Missouri wins. Boston College covers the 16.5. Let's go to South Carolina, a good SEC matchup. LSU ranked 16th, going to South Carolina. Here we've got a home dog. South Carolina getting 6.5. LSU and Brian Kelly favored in this one by 6.5. After needing a fourth quarter comeback to beat Old Dominion in week 1, South Carolina bounced back. Impressive 31-6 road win over Kentucky. Brian Kelly, they're still trying to figure themselves out after that neutral site loss to USC. Now, we do think that USC is really good. So I do think that LSU is a really good football team. I was impressed with the way that South Carolina played last week, however. South Carolina has been led by its defense. Okay, the defense is really, really solid. They have forced 6 turnovers, and they've only allowed 2 touchdowns in their first 2 games. They've got that true freshman edge player, Dylan Stewart. This dude is really good, and you can understand why there was so much hype around him in the recruiting process. He's already got 2.5 sacks, 9 quarterback pressures, and will get a stiff test against those tackles from LSU. But I think Dylan Stewart is the real deal. We've got some major freshmen in this class. I've already talked about 2 of them. Obviously, Jeremiah Smith would be one. There's some others playing really well around the country. Dylan Raiola is playing really well. Like, this freshman class has been impactful here early in the year. They also have a transfer from Georgia Tech, Kyle Kennard. He's got 3.5 sacks already on the year. Those 2 guys have got to get to got to get to the quarterback, Nussmeier. They've got to put pressure on Nussmeier because Nussmeier has shown at LSU, and he did this against USC, that he's very capable at quarterback. I did not love when Brian Kelly kind of threw him under the bus and said that their quarterback played better than ours. I thought Nussmeier played really well against USC. So to me, it comes down to the fact that, like, I do think that LSU is a very good football team because USC is a very good football team. And in a lot of ways, USC kind of scraped by LSU. LSU was about to impose their will. USC gets a couple of stops, and then all of a sudden they win the game because Miller Moss just wills them down the field late in that game. LSU is still a good football team. They still have, I would say, as good a tackles as any in the country. They are going to be without their starting running back, John Emery. He tore his ACL a few days after that USC game, and they did struggle to run the ball against Nicholls State last week, only 3.2 yards per carry. That's going to need to turn around. Nussmeier, I like Nussmeier. I like LSU. Even on the road, I think they find a way to win because they're going to have to. You got to understand, these proud programs like this, when they get an early season loss, man, it is back to the drawing board. Those practices become even tougher. There's an old adage that, like, you develop most through early season failures. And I agree with that because there's so much to fix. You can take a team that might be complacent and might even be arrogant, maybe, and you can bring them back down to earth and coach them really hard. There is no doubt that has happened at LSU. There's no doubt. Meanwhile, South Carolina feeling real good about themselves after that win against Kentucky. I think that LSU gets the win on the road. Now, 6.5 on the road, that's a lot. So again, I'm going to take the points for South Carolina and say LSU wins a close one. Nussmeier plays really well late, and LSU wins this one 24-21, but South Carolina covers at home. Now we get into basically like rivalry weekend. This is all of a sudden rivalry weekend, and I've got 3 games, all rivalries, and we're in September. Oregon State, the Civil War. Dan Lanning's Oregon team, man, I tell you, they've got to head to Corvallis after 2 of the most uninspiring wins of any team in the country. The expectation for Oregon was off the charts. My expectation for Oregon was off the charts. And they came out and played, I hate to say it, awful the first 2 weeks. Now, I do want to give them the benefit of the doubt that Boise is a heck of a team, and Boise might even become the playoff team. And Ashton Jeanty, the running back for Boise State, could be the best running back in the country. He might be one of the first running backs taken in the NFL draft. So I don't want to just dismiss the fact that Oregon was able to beat Boise State, even though that one was at home. Remember, Oregon had never beaten Boise State. They were 0-3 against the Broncos in their history. So I don't want to just say like, hey, it's been totally terrible. The sky is falling for Oregon. Let's give them a little bit of due that they were able to win the game. Now, the fashion that it happened, they had to have a couple of special team scores. They needed big plays. They got outplayed. That's what was alarming. If they were to go out and handle Oregon State, I think that would be kind of riding the ship. Oregon's ranked 9th now. They're dropping down in the rankings. They're favored by 16.5 at Oregon State. Keep in mind, you go back the last few years, the home team wins this game in a rivalry game. Now, this game normally happens Thanksgiving week, so you've had the entire season to develop. But now you've got a team in Oregon State that I actually think is more dangerous early. Because what we saw is that they got hammered by the transfer portal. When they were left without a conference and their coach, Jonathan Smith, left for Michigan State, they got hammered in the transfer portal. And so their depth is not going to be what it was, I would say, last year, which means that they're going to be more dangerous early in the season than they are late. This is not a good recipe for Oregon to have to go to that location. This Oregon State's going to feel like they were left high and dry, the entire fan base. That environment is going to be raucous, if not almost toxic, toward Oregon. And Oregon hasn't played well in the first couple of weeks. Oh, hey, by the way, and Oregon State has maintained their foundation, maintained their identity, even though Jonathan Smith left. They elevated Trent Bray from defensive coordinator to head coach after Jonathan Smith left, and he was a Beaver himself. He went to Oregon State. He was an assistant since 2018. He knows the program and he knows the players. He also knows how they started to have success the last couple of years. So hear me out here. All of a sudden, Trent Bray says, you know what? Everybody's different. Everything is the same. I've been saying that line about Michigan. Now, has Michigan done that? No, they lost to Texas. However, Oregon State, they've kept running the football. They ran it 51 times for 237 yards in a win over San Diego State last week. Okay. You think those guys aren't going to be fired up to play Oregon? You think that environment's not going to be off the charts? Oregon had to deal with Ashton Jeanty last week from Boise, and now they're going to have to deal with Oregon State, and they want to run the ball 50-plus times. So that defense better buckle it up. They better buckle it up. I'm nervous for Oregon in this game. 16.5 is ridiculous. I tried to say that they were going to cover the big spread last week against Boise. Folks, I know when I get this passionate and when I think to myself, like, no way. I think to myself, like, they know something that I don't know. But nothing about this game, the intangibles or the tangibles, what I can see on film, what I can see on a stat sheet, what is playing out before my eyes, also the intangibles, everything suggests that this is going to be a close game. Everything suggests that this is going to be incredibly difficult just for Oregon to win by a point, which would necessitate a gun rack. Twice this week, I'm hitting you with Wayne's World, and it's amazing. I don't want to say there's no way, because then I'll get beat. If I say there's no way, then Oregon might win. It ain't going to be by 16.5. Oregon's got to fix their offensive line issues. They've given up 7 sacks in 2 games. That's more sacks than they gave up all of last year. And Dylan Gabriel's going to have to continue to bail them out at times. Dan Lanning has got an absolute test on his hands. Okay, here's where I'm going with this. Against better judgment, I think that the Ducks win the game. Close. I like 34-31. Dylan Gabriel's experience is the X factor late in this game, and Oregon wins the Civil War on the road by 3, but Oregon State covers the points. Apple Cup. Washington State heads to Washington. Similar thing here, although Washington's not going to have to deal with Pullman and the toxic environment around the conference realignment and so on and so forth. It'll be a great environment, but it's going to be at home. So Jed Fish and company will be more comfortable than what Oregon's going to have to deal with when they go to Oregon State. Now, Washington at home is favored by 4.5. This is the 116th Apple Cup, and it'll be played in Seattle, but it will be, by the way, at Lumen Field. It's not going to be in Husky Stadium. So it'll be played in the Seahawks Stadium. This is going to be Jed Fish's first Apple Cup, and he faces Jake Dickert, who, as you know, has just been so emphatic about everything that's gone on in college football. You know this team is going to be ready to go, this Washington State team. They're both 2-0. Washington State coming off an impressive 37-16 win at home over Texas Tech. And this is a Texas Tech team under Joey McGuire that we thought could potentially compete for a spot in the Big 12 title game. So Washington State is, hey, man, they're not bad. I like their quarterback. He leads all quarterbacks in rushing this season. He's got 252 yards in 2 games. He backed up Cam Ward the last couple of years. So listen, he's been in the system. He knows what's going on. I love their mentality. They're tough. Mississippi State transfer Will Rogers. He's completed 80% of his passes for Washington so far. 5 touchdowns, no interceptions for UW. Their running back, Jonah Coleman, he came in with Fish from Arizona and has been really good so far. He's averaging 115 yards per game on over 8.5 per carry. So what do we like in this one? I know that this normally takes place on Thanksgiving weekend, very similar to Oregon State. But in rivalry games, I hate laying points in rivalry games. I hate that. I think Washington wins in a close game. I think Washington State covers. I've got 28-24 Huskies in Lumen Field in Seattle. Huskies get the win. Washington State covers the 4.5. Last game, and I'm going to go a little bit quicker on this because candidly, I wanted to put this next team in the 2023 Texas category, which was I'm done talking about you until you do something. But I was talked into talking about this game because I've played in it. Fine. Colorado State. Last game I'm going to talk about. Colorado favored by 7.5, and this one is on the road, true road game, not neutral site, not in Denver. It's up in Fort Collins against Colorado State. And they're favored by 7.5. It's a 5 p.m. local kick, so it's going to be a night game. They're going to be rowdy. And I'm just going to tell you this from absolute first-person experience. Colorado State hates Colorado. Hates them. One of my best friends in the world went to CSU. I absolutely hold it against him, clearly, because all he wanted to do in his life was probably go to Colorado, because all of us that went to Colorado also got in at Colorado State. That was my last shot. That was it. That was my last shot. They're going to go up there, and Colorado State is actually a really good football team. And yeah, it's like, oh, they got hammered by Texas. Did you see Texas on Saturday? Texas is ridiculously good. I think that this Colorado State team is going to play really well. I really do. Colorado's got some injuries. Shiloh Sanders out after having arm surgery. Dalton Hayden likely out as well. One of their new defensive linemen, Chiduzi, I'm saying that wrong. Anyways, Wongkuo. Tough name to pronounce, but he could be out on the defensive line. I loathe the Colorado offensive game plan over the course of the first 2 weeks. It's so static. There's no movement. There's no creativity. We know what happened last year, and we know the environment that this game was a year ago, and that one was in Boulder. That was a classic. Shedeur led that comeback, got to overtime. Buffs actually ended up winning that game. Can we just for a moment, like all of this rivalry, yes, and like there's going to be injuries, and we're like, oh, okay, Shedeur is good, and Travis is obviously the best player on the field, and Torrey Hunter, by the way, excuse me. Torrey Horton. Every time I see Torrey, I want to say Hunter. Torrey Horton is an All-American caliber wide receiver for Colorado State. Can we just pause for a moment and think about how big this game is for Colorado and Coach Prime? This is unequivocally the biggest game that Colorado has had since Coach Prime has gotten there, because they cannot lose this game. If they lose this game, where do you go from here? This would be a sign of regression in the second year. If you just frame it like that, you understand the urgency that Colorado is going to have in this game. They have to win, and they're going up into an environment that's going to be very difficult to do that. They've been the most pass-heavy team in the nation this season, which I'm not upset about because, yes, like they're going to throw the football, but they have to create some first down run game. Because the more that Shedeur has to throw the ball because he has to versus because he wants to, the more that they're going to get beat and the more he's going to get sacked. They've got to get some creativity and movement in that offense pre-snap to put the defense in conflict. They've got to do that. Colorado State lost to Texas 51-0 in the opener, and then they beat Northern Colorado 38-17 last week. Braden Fowler-Nicolosi threw for 347 yards and 3 touchdowns, but also 3 interceptions in last year's meeting. They killed Colorado's man defense, and Colorado does not adjust off of man defense. Watch for those crossing routes early to the tight end, to Horton. They're just going to bring those shallow crossing routes. Boom, boom, boom. And I would sit right there until Colorado proved that they would stop running man coverage, because they've got a great man cover player in Travis Hunter, but everybody else is not great in man coverage. So they get hurt by the quarterback run in man coverage. They get hurt by the crossing routes in man coverage. You can tell that I watch these games incredibly closely. Colorado's defense has looked better in the second half of each of their first 2 games and given themselves a chance to win. Listen, because they have to win, and I'm certainly not picking Colorado State to win, obviously, I've got Colorado winning this one in a classic, again, 24-20. It's going to be a close game. I don't like the 7.5 for Colorado, but I like the Buffs to pull this one out late. They've got to protect Shedeur. If they don't protect Shedeur and they just sit in a static formation, this is going to be a long day. If they don't adjust off of their man coverage and defense, it's going to be a long day. So that's what I like. I'm basically taking every dog to cover. So do with that what you will. There's the picks, everybody. Listen, we've got some cool stuff coming up this week. Remember, live show from Madison will be posted to YouTube on Friday. We've got some YouTube exclusive content on Texas, the game plan, and Ewers play last week on Saturday against Michigan. So a little film study coming out on YouTube this week as well. So if you're not subscribed to the YouTube channel, get over there and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Those are the picks. Enjoy college football this weekend, everybody.